Thank you. And I will say the pledge, and you can follow along. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I understand no one has signed up for good and welfare. I see we have no recognitions and announcements. Is that correct, Dr. McGee?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. I have none this evening.
Okay. Next, we'll look to the approval of minutes. I'll make a motion to approve the February 3rd, 2021 workshop open minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Costa. Any corrections, deletions, amendments to the minutes? Hearing none, Dr. McGee, roll call.
Chairman Bourget,
Yes.
Vice Chair Burke,
Yes.
Mrs. Kapiskas,
Yes.
Mrs. Costa,
Yes.
Mr. Leclerc.
Yes.
Next, I'll make a motion to approve the February 10th, 2021 open session minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Vice Chair Burke. Dr. McGee?
Chairman Bourget,
Yes.
Vice Chair Burke,
Yes.
Mrs. Kapiskas,
Yes.
Mrs. Costa,
Fuck off.
Mr. Leclerc.
Yes.
Sorry about this.
What was that?
I apologize.
Next, I'll make a motion to discuss and approve the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Vice Chair Burke. Dr. McGee, now before we do that, let's talk about the consent agenda. Is there any member of the committee that would like to take anything out of order to discuss any item within the consent agenda?
Nope.
Dr. McGee, roll call, please.
Chairman Bourget,
Yes.
Vice Chair Burke,
Yes.
Mrs. Kapiskas,
Yes.
Mrs. Costa,
Yes.
Mr. Leclerc.
Yes.
Dr. McGee, I would ask you to give us your report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to start off with the personnel.
Yeah.
I have it right here. We have 3 new hires to date. We have 1 new hire, which is a Title Title III study pal, and we have 2 other stipend positions that we've added over the last 2 weeks. Second agenda item is school reopening, and I just want to announce first that due to the special election on Tuesday, March 2nd, Savoy and Harris Elementary Schools will both be virtual on that day. Staff will not be reporting to school. All staff will be working virtually, as will all students on Tuesday, March 2nd. And that's due to the fact that both buildings are being used as polling locations. Secondly, Woonsocket High School sports, I just want to provide a brief update. Had a meeting with Principal Henderson, Athletic Director Giordano, and the head football coach, Mr. Bebo, about a week and a half ago. And we discussed the high school football season. The decision, it was a unanimous decision by the 4 of us that due to concerns with safety, COVID safety, as well as conditioning concerns, that the football season will not, our students will not participate this winter and this spring in football. We do have spring sports, which at this point will be competing, and that's girls volleyball, unified sports, the middle school sports, and the high school and middle school baseball, softball, and track and field. And lastly, I'm going to speak briefly about the contract negotiations, our update. Our team, and again, not our negotiating team, but team of administrators and central office directors have been meeting regularly. We have I believe it's our final meeting we're scheduling for next week, so that we will be in a position with our attorney, Sarah Rapport, to provide our recommendations to the negotiating team, the WED negotiating team, so that we can begin those contract negotiations in early March with the Teachers Guild Local 1137, and our paraprofessionals. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report. Be happy to answer any questions.
Any committee member have any comments or questions for Dr. McGee?
Dr.
Then I'll
McGee, Mr. Chair?
Oh, Mrs. Kapiskas, please.
It's not really a question, but I did want to follow up. I had sent Dr. McGee an email yesterday about the dismissal time at the high school, and I wanted to indicate that Mr. Henderson did reach out to me today and explained that there was just another minor change to the dismissal time at the high school in order to accommodate busing issues. And in case the parents who reached out to me are listening, I wanted them to be aware of that. And if I didn't reach out to you because I've lost your name, let me know, and I'll fill you in, send me an email. But I wanted you to know that I did speak to Mr. Henderson, and it was a busing issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Kapiskas. I spoke with Mr. Henderson. He called me this afternoon to let me know that he did have a conversation with you regarding the issues. So thank you.
Anyone else? Then I'll make a motion to receive and place on file the superintendent's report. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Costa. Dr. McGee, roll call, please.
Chairman Bourget,
Yes.
Vice Chair Burke,
Yes.
Mrs. Kapiskas,
Yes.
Mrs. Costa,
Yes.
Mr. Leclerc.
Yes.
Thank you. Next, we'll go into the subcommittee reports. On Monday, this past Monday, we had a facilities update by the subcommittee. Mr. Leclerc and I attended that meeting, and I'll ask Mr. Notoriani just to give us a brief summary of the items that we've discussed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we had our initial discussion on the COVID-19 preparations or continual preparations. We had a facilities project update where we talked about the high school boilers, where we're at with those, the Career Tech Center boilers, playground repairs and the status of where we're at with that project, the high school handicap ramp, which the school construction program is going to look at and give us a proposal for, and fencing towards the rear of the Citizens Elementary School. In addition to that, we talked about the 5-year capital plan and resuming that process. We talked about the parking situation at the McPhee Administration Building. We also discussed the vaccination program and how that has shifted from being in the public schools to another location as chosen by the city. We talked about building usage for the remainder of the school year, and that the district is going to continue with the policy of not allowing outside groups other than the city itself from using our buildings until the pandemic subsides. We talk about replacing equipment for Sanders in the facilities department. We had a transportation update, which we alluded to the issue that Mrs. Kapiskas spoke about earlier in terms of transportation issues due to the fact that we changed the school time. We talked about the Trust Safety Committee audit of all the school parking lots and the condition of the school parking lots. And that was all. That concludes it, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions or comments regarding the facilities update? Then I'll make a motion to receive and place on file the facilities update. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Leclerc. Dr. McGee, please.
Chairman Bourget,
Yes.
Vice Chair Burke,
Yes.
Mrs. Kapiskas,
Yes.
Mrs. Costa,
Yes.
Mr. Leclerc.
Yes.
Thank you. Next, we'll go into the technology update. I'll ask Vice Chair Burke and Mrs. Costa to give us the update.
The Technology Committee met yesterday, and we talked about two main areas, and I'm going to ask Mr. Notarani to expand on them in a second. But we talked about our infrastructure, dealing with servers and the internet, and we also talked about communication, dealing with our website, email, and our telephone system. And that became the main part of our meeting and our life. To explain,
Mr. Burke, you're breaking up.
Things there, maybe talking about that grant that we were working on, talking about the grant we were working on, and the website. So can I turn it over to you?
Thank you, Vice Chairman. So we did talk about infrastructure projects. Specifically, we talked about replacing our servers, and that would be something to be funded under the E-rate program, which is a 10% match. So the federal government would pay for 90% of the cost of replacing the servers throughout the district, and the district would be responsible for paying the 10% difference. And those servers basically facilitate caching in all the districts for state testing, key fobs, and time clocks. In addition to that, we also discussed briefly the potential for having free, high-speed, lightning speed internet throughout the city. We were going to pilot that potentially first in one location, as Mr. Perrier and Dr. McGee promised many months ago. So that's a potential pilot in the near future. We then talked about the communications in the district, and we're going to be releasing an RFP. We're in the final stages of releasing an RFP to replace our website and potentially replace the email, text, and classroom communication tools that the district utilizes. In addition to that, we also just covered that we'll be starting next week or the week after with Granite Communications to replace all of our phone systems as of July 1st, which would be a significant savings to the district. And then the last two items were the electronic enrollment registration process. We purchased a new online registration module. And earlier today, we had our first registration meeting where we're going to review the registration process in the district and hopefully streamline it and make it more efficient for all interested stakeholders. And the last item was we had 19 work orders in the work order system for technology. That concludes my notes on the meeting. Vice Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Chair Burke, and thank you, Mr. Notoriani. Any questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, just before
Yes.
I leave, I don't know, Ms. Costa, do you have anything more to add from our discussion?
I do not. I think you guys pretty much touched up on everything that we did talk about pretty much.
Okay, good. All right, thank you.
Any comments?
very much.
Any comments or questions for our three spokespeople on the committee? Dr. McGee, roll call.
Chairman Bourget,
Yes.
Vice Chair Burke,
Yes,
Mrs. Kepiscus,
Yes.
Mrs. Costa,
Yes.
Mr. Leclerc.
Yes.
Next, we'll talk about the finance update. Today, Mr. Leclerc and I attended the Finance Subcommittee report, and we touched upon various items. So I'll ask Mr. Perrier if he would take us through we talked about.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. We've touched on 4 separate items at the Finance Subcommittee meeting today. The first was the possible discussion of adding time clocks to the Woonsocket Education Department. This was a preliminary discussion. I've begun to gather some information on time clocks, and I'm going to do a little bit more work on that. We're going to present again to the Finance Subcommittee next time with some additional information in regards to some additional equipment, maybe a sharper quote, and a little bit more information as to the benefits and that we would be seeking by installing these time clocks. We talked about the CARES Act grant briefly. We continue to spend through our CARES Act grant money. Right now, so the school committee and the public is aware, we are waiting for an additional CARES Act funding dollar distribution. I believe it is being worked out at the state level this time, so we are awaiting that additional distribution. And when we receive it, we will have to do some planning on how we're going to want to spend that money. The Department of Education is looking for us to spend this money to improve instruction. So there will be a broad discussion on how that money will be applied going forward. I updated the committee on the FY21 salary adjustments for both the teachers and the TAs. For those who are not aware, there is a clause in the contract this year that any increase in state aid, 25% of that would have to be dispersed to both the teachers and the TAs. 20% will go to the teachers and 5% will go to the TAs. We have been working with the union on getting this dispersed. I think we're there with the teachers. I think we're very close on settling with the TAs, the distribution of funds. Just so everybody is aware, these funds have been budgeted and they have been encumbered. So we're looking at about a little over $1.2 million in expenditures, but there will be no change on financial statements going forward, as we've already both budgeted and encumbered these as expenses. And finally, we had a brief update on our OPEB financial performance. We're going to continue to keep an eye on this going forward month to month. Just so everyone is aware, since the initial investment on the OPEB, we have raised over $200,000. So the investment has been working out well so far. We haven't had to touch any OPEB funds to pay for retiree benefits. So this is just a good thing to have in our back pocket in case we do run into problems with medical down the road. It's something that we can tap into.
That pretty much covered what we discussed at the meeting. Mr. Leclerc, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Nothing to add.
Okay. Any questions, comments for Mr. Leclerc, myself, or Mr. Perrier? Then I'll make a motion, receive and place on file the financial update. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Leclerc. Dr. McGee, please.
Chairman Bourget,
Yes.
Vice Chair Burke,
Yes.
Mrs. Kepiscus,
Yes.
Mrs. Costa,
Yes.
Mr. Leclerc.
Yes.
We have one item in unfinished business. I'll make a motion to discuss and approve the information privacy and security policy for second passage. Is there a second?
Chairman?
Mr. Chairman,
Well, who's that?
I think you went out of order.
Okay. I am?
Conferences and discussions.
Believe it or not. I didn't intend to. I didn't. You're absolutely correct. Thank you very much for those who caught that. I was jumping the gun. So let's go backwards, and I'll ask Dr. Sullivan and Ms. Morell to give us the special education update. I'm sorry for that.
Hi, Woonsocket was recently asked if we would support the Rhode Island Parent Information Network. They have an application into the United Way of Rhode Island, and they're trying to fund a project that provides Spanish language special education support to students and their families. It is for students who are disabled and speak Spanish and their families, and it's a program that's going to impact their educational achievement by supplying materials and support to them. We should find out sometime in late spring whether or not that funding is approved, and if it is approved, then we will participate in it. Also in April, the dynamic learning maps, or the DLM, it's the state assessment for students who are on alternate assessment that will be starting up in April. And we have the same guidance on this that the other assessments do, that if a family does not participate, we have to take a 0 on it. So any of our students that are distance learners, we will be trying to bring in and set them up in a place that's secure and safe, and encourage them to participate in the state assessment. We're lucky we don't have a lot of students that fall in this category that are distance learning right now. Most of our students are coming in person. So I think we'll be in good shape.
Let me ask you one question, Dr. Sullivan. If we have students, a handful of them, just say, that will not come into school, will we go to them to give them the assessment? Is that? No, so they have to come in.
They have to come in.
Okay, all right. Ms. Morell, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, that is all.
Okay. Any questions for Dr. Sullivan or Mrs. Morell? Ms. Morell. I'll make a motion then to receive and place on file the special education update. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Costa. Dr. McGee?
Chairman Bourget,
Yes.
Vice Chair Burke,
Yes.
Mrs. Kepiscus,
Yes.
Mrs. Costa,
Yes.
Mr. Leclerc.
Yes.
Now I'll ask Mr. Perrier to give us the financial update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In front of the school committee this evening is the January 2021 fiscal update. Overall, there hasn't been much movement since the last time I gave a fiscal update to the school committee. We are at this time projecting a $449,000 surplus for the year. Some financial highlights I'd like to review. On the revenue side, taxes levied from local government units is projected to be $250,000 under budget. The additional $250,000 in funding that was asked for was not approved by the city, and we are being funded at our FY20 level. At this time, rental income is projected to be under budget by $230,000. Due to the pandemic, there haven't been many requests for building usage. And finally, the Medicaid reimbursement projection has been reduced due to reduction of billable services for the fiscal year. On the expenditure side, all regular salaries are projected to be $320K under budget at this time. Our salary substitute line still currently is projected to be under budget this month by $526,000. As we've mentioned historically in the past here, that it's been difficult to secure subs for in-person learning due to the pandemic, and this has led to a fiscal savings, as well as not needing the subs for classrooms being fully virtual. Regular overtime is projected to be $513,000 over budget. This was touched upon briefly in a prior fiscal update. This was due to the period that we were paying double time for 1137 employees. Normal overtime rules are now in effect district-wide. Our medical expenses are currently $86K over budget right now. Over the last few months, we have really seen an increase on our week-to-week billings as far as what we've received from Blue Cross Blue Shield. We're pretty much on our budget number now, as that is an $8 million budget item. So we are pretty close to being on budget right now. I'm hopeful that we aren't going to see too much higher of a swing, but this is a very tricky item to budget for and project. So it is something that we will continue to keep an eye on going forward. As I mentioned during the Finance Subcommittee update, we do have about $900,000 in our OPEB account that we can tap into if this increases exponentially. At this time, no money has been reserved for OPEB expense. This is an expense that we would normally do to fund that OPEB account. This year in fiscal year 21, we had a $400,000 budget item. And until we get a little more clarity on our medical expenses, we will not be funding this going forward. The district is projected to be $328K over budget on tuitions to other districts. This has been due to the increase in Woonsocket students choosing to attend other districts to pursue other educational pathways. And finally, we are very close to wrapping up the CARES Supplemental Impact Aid. I believe that we have about $90,000 more in expense that we will be removing from the general fund and booking against the Supplemental Impact Aid. And then we'll have our $4 million spend through on that completed, and that grant will be closed out. At this time, I'd like to take any questions from the committee.
Mr. Perrier, you've explained this in the past. Could you explain to me what the subtotal other of a negative 854,000 is?
You, I believe, are looking at the
Summary.
The summary on the other. Okay, that is actually a UCOA, kind of a little UCOA thing. And UCOA, Mr. Leclerc, I like to use those acronyms.
That's right.
Uniform Chart of Accounts. That's what that is. That's the account system for the Rhode Island Department of Ed. It was developed about 10 years ago. Every school district uses the same chart of accounts. There's different objects within that chart, but basically the whole state of Rhode Island uses the same accounting number system. This is kind of a byproduct of UCOA. Basically, the Department of Ed wants you to split out the savings that you would estimate from both employee turnover and from vacant positions, and that's the number that we have there that you roll up into the budget number.
So at the end of the year, if those positions stay vacant, does that mean that our surplus is actually higher than 449?
Yeah, we would take that, and if we have those vacancies, we would then roll it up under the salaries account, and that would basically reduce the savings there, and that's how you get to the zero.
Right. So actually, the surplus could be higher.
Correct.
Than what we're showing right now.
Correct.
So you take the 854 and add it to the 449. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, we have that kind of a cushion if everything holds steady the way we are. Just want to make that clear. Any questions, comments from Mr. Perrier?
Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chair Burke.
Thank you. I'm concerned about the item of the $328,000 over budget for tuitions out of district because students are choosing other educational paths. I don't know how many students we're dealing with, but is the education department looking at the reason why a lot of these students are opting out of the Woonsocket schools? I've seen ads in the paper recently for Burrillville's career and tech centers and Cumberland's career and tech centers. Are we losing students to those programs? I don't know. I'm just raising the question, but is someone looking into why these people are leaving and what we need to do to keep them? So to me, that over budget amount is raising a concern that I think we have to address.
I can respond to that, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. McGee, what is
Thank
that noise? Sounds like construction. Dr. McGee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Burke, that's a very good question. We actually started that discussion, I think at the last, might be the last school committee meeting. Mr. Leclerc brought the same issue up. So what's happened is there, based on previous Commissioner of Education, districts, families have the option of going to other high schools for CTE, which means career and technical education programs that are certified by the Department of Education. So, so it basically opens up the ability for students to attend schools outside of their community if they apply to specific pathways that those particular schools are offering. So here in Rhode Island, the districts that we're competing with currently really are Cumberland, Pontiac to a lesser degree, Lincoln as well, but mainly it's been Cumberland. And Cumberland has some CTE programs. Specifically, one of them is law, and there are others that students, even though a district may provide that particular pathway or CTE program, they can still elect to go to another community that offers the same one or a different one. So that's the dilemma that we've been met with. You know, I had a very frustrating summer. For those of you that were around me this summer, I was extremely cranky because it seemed like I was getting daily, you know, families that were unenrolling in Woonsocket High School and electing to go to other districts. I have had conversations with Mr. Henderson and his leadership team. They are currently working on strengthening, or actually I should say creating CTE programs at Woonsocket High School. So what we have here in Woonsocket is we have a career center. And, you know, as you know, we have 11 programs at our career center, which are very successful. And we service students from other communities and other districts. But what we're focusing on now, and what Mr. Henderson and his leadership team's focusing on for next year, are creating these CTE pathways at Woonsocket High School. You know, one area that we excel in at Woonsocket High School, and it's noted with the celebrations and the musicals and the plays that that Woonsocket High School's theater arts program puts on every year. That's one area that they're looking at possibly creating a CTE pathway. So we are working on it. They are working on it, you know, among a variety of other initiatives at Woonsocket High School that will be implemented next year. So that's sort of the history and where we are now, and the plans that we're currently putting in place so that we can, you know, retain our students at Woonsocket High School, because we've lost students that are at you know, Monsignor Gattery, who would be coming to Woonsocket High School, but we've lost some of those students to the CTE programs, as well as some of our Woonsocket Middle School 8th graders. So the high school administration is working on it because we really do have to become more competitive with some of the surrounding districts.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, just follow up.
Yeah, please.
Good. Thank you, Dr. McGee. That does explain a lot. Do you think some of this issue this year is dealing with the pandemic and dealing with schools being opened or virtual or hybrid, where some other districts may be in person completely? I mean, do you think some of that is related? And will those issues be of less concern, hopefully next year when we're in better shape?
I don't think it's based solely on the pandemic, in that, some high schools might have been opened to a hybrid model, in the beginning of the year. As you know, Cumberland was, I think they began the year in hybrid, and Woonsocket High School did not. I don't think that's the case. I mean, it could be the case in some instances. I certainly can't speak for every family, but I know that prior to school districts submitting their reopening plans to RIDE, which they were all due at the end of July, I was receiving a lot of emails and messages from parents prior to July, before the decisions were made whether high schools would be returning, full in person or hybrid, or would be out virtually.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Dr. McGee, these students that are leaving for these programs, they're not just leaving for the CTEs, right? They're leaving school for all the classes.
That's correct. That's correct. They are. And it really, I mean, as you can imagine, there are some school districts, and I've had some conversations with Superintendent in Warwick, Phil Thornton. Warwick Public Schools, they're losing a lot of students to other communities through CTE programs that they might be offering there, but they're losing those students. So I know that Phil Thornton has testified before the state Senate and in various commissions on tightening up the regulations, where, for example, if a school district already provides that particular program, then the student would not be permitted to go to another district. They would need to stay. So I've had conversations with him, and I told him, if you need any help from me and from us in Woonsocket, I will certainly join him in his advocacy for really making that ability more stringent, to move to another district that at least has the programs that you're offering there.
I kind of agree with Vice Chair Burke, because if we've seen a lot of activity this year, starting with the summer, I think the pandemic's had quite a bit of an impact, because, we're in a hybrid mode. They may be going to a school district that's basically all in person, or trying to get more in person. And that could be a factor this year. Hopefully next year things calm down, but I got to believe it's got an impact. It's not just because they're going for a special program, because there's still a comfort zone within your own district. So I'm hopeful that it's the pandemic that's really pushing this motion of our students, this movement, so that next year we'll get more of them staying here.
I hope you're right, but we have to be more competitive. We have to ramp up what we already have, so that our students want to stay here. I know some of the conversations I've had with parents, this summer certainly, and even prior to this summer, it's been happening. Not necessarily to the degree that it's happened this summer, but many of them have said, they preferred this particular program, in Cumberland or Pontiac. But I think you're correct to a certain degree. It might have been because we started the year virtually, but again, we have to get more competitive, and
right.
We have very strong career and technical center programs here in Woonsocket, and I know Mr. Webb and his team, they're constantly looking to strengthen the existing programs, to make them much more appealing to students in surrounding communities and across the state, and we really need to do that at Woonsocket High School as well.
Do you think that, Mr. Perrier spoke about the additional CARES Act money? Will some of those funds be used to do exactly what you're talking about, ramping up programs at both the Career Center and the high school?
So that's not an area that we can use those funds for.
Okay.
Actually, we as sort of as an aside, we had a conversation in our subcommittee meeting earlier today about, using those added funds that we'll be receiving, and our plans, and we've been meeting, and we're going to continue to be meeting to plan out what types of supports our students are going to need this summer and even next year. So those monies are going to primarily be used towards summer programming, as well as bolstering the current programming we have really in K through 11 across the district, so that we can support our students as we begin the 2021 school year in September.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions for Dr. McGee or Mr. Perrier?
Mr. Chair, it's Lynn Kapiskas.
Mrs. Kapiskas, please.
I hate to be the naysayer in the crowd, and I've already expressed my displeasure at the state level on the CTE program and the way it runs, in terms of you being able to hop, skip, and jump and essentially get school choice without school choice. My concern is, I don't know how to say this gracefully, could part of it be concerns, because I really think that it is, with school climate, and perceived or otherwise, perceived or real, people have some school climate issues with the high school, and they could be looking for alternatives for their students who would otherwise go to Woonsocket High School to go to Cumberland or Lincoln, because they perceive the school climate is better there, whether it actually is or not. And I don't know how we could address that, but I think that's an issue in addition to the CTE, in all fairness.
Mr. Chairman?
I was going to say, Dr. McGee, you're up.
Thank you. Very good point, Mrs. Kapiskas. I think certainly in some instances, because families now have really, as you said, school choice to go, to a suburban school district, then I think they're also taking advantage of that. In addition to their ability to go there, we pay their transportation. So it's even more, of a positive for them as they look to do that. There's a lot of work that's being started at the high school. Mr. Henderson and his leadership team, one of the things, and we discussed this at our most recent curriculum subcommittee meeting, is Mr. Henderson and his team are in the process of putting together plans for a ninth grade academy. Because as you are aware, and other members of the committee are aware, we lose many of our ninth graders academically, socially, emotionally when they get to the high school, because, and that's not a knock against the high school, it's just they're going from an environment where it's much more personalized. They have teams. They're with the same number of students. Each day they go from class to class with them. So they're in the process of putting together plans for next year to establish a ninth grade academy, which will make it much more personalized for our ninth graders, so that they hopefully will see success in the ninth grade and will stay with us really from the ninth grade to the 10th grade. But those are a lot of areas that that the high school leadership is looking at, and climate and culture are certainly one of them.
Mrs. Kapiskas, do you have a follow-up thought, comment? Anyone else have questions for Dr. McGee or Mr. Perrier? Then I'll make a motion to receive and place on file the financial update. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Costa. Dr. McGee, roll call, please.
Chairman Bourget,
Yes.
Vice Chair Burke,
Yes.
Mrs. Kapiskas,
Yes.
Mrs. Costa,
Yes.
Mr. Leclerc.
Yes.
I think now we can go to unfinished business.
Yes.
It's the next item on the list. I'll make a motion to discuss and approve the information privacy and security policy for second passage. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion on this policy? Dr. McGee, roll call, please.
Chairman Bourget,
Yes.
Vice Chair Burke,
Yes.
Mrs. Kapiskas,
Yes.
Mrs. Costa,
Yes.
Mr. Leclerc.
Yes.
Next, I'll ask Dr. McGee for a roll call so we can vote on for the non-renewal of the employment of probationary teachers. This subject was covered in closed session. Dr. McGee, roll call.
Chairman Bourget,
Yes.
Vice Chair Burke,
Yes.
Mrs. Kepiscus,
Yes.
Mrs. Costa,
Yes.
Mr. Leclerc.
Yes.
Next, I'll make a motion to discuss and approve the revisions to the middle school grading policy for first passage. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Second by Vice Chair Burke and Mrs. Costa. Dr. McGee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the last curriculum subcommittee meeting, on the agenda was a discussion on the Woonsocket Middle School grading policy. When I say we had a discussion on the grading policy, we were looking at for the remainder of this school year, because as you know, a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, the middle school established a new grading policy, which you have in your documents. So the conversations that were had during that curriculum subcommittee meeting were around students who were struggling and students who were either working fully virtual or in hybrid or in complete one-to-one during the week. So one of the concerns that Ms. Renegaldo, who's a principal of Hamlet Middle School, who's here this evening, and Mrs. Granado, principal at Villanova Middle School, was holding students accountable from now through the remainder of the year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go through the portions that are in red print on the document that you have. And then Ms. Renegaldo is also, as I said, is also here to answer any questions you may have that I may not be able to answer. So again, I want to just restate that we're looking at making really just one change to the actual policy, which would just be from now, would actually be the second passage at the next meeting to the end of the school year. And then any possible changes or revisions to the grading policy for next year would come back to the school committee this spring, and then would be that policy would then be reflected in the fall. So on the first page, you'll see there's a chart here that has formative assessments and summative assessments, and I'm not going to get into too great a detail, but I'll just explain that formative assessments are assessments that teachers take of their students that gives them sort of immediate feedback. It could be a test, or it could be a quiz, or it could be homework. Those are types of things, those are types of assessments that give the teacher information so that they can either change the mode of instruction that they're using with their students, or they can just try different things based on the needs of the students based on those formative assessments. Summative assessments in the second column would be assessments that are taken at the end of a marking period. So it would be, at the end of the quarter, it could be at the end of the semester, major tests, exams, culminating projects. So I just wanted to frame this part of the grading policy so that everyone's on the same page. If you look at that formative assessment column in red type, there are some formative assessments that are no longer utilized at the middle school from the time that the grading policy was established a few years ago. And that would be reading logs, book reports, and book quizzes. Some of those are found, like for example, the book quizzes, if you go up to the top of the formative assessment column, if you look at the second category, it's quizzes. So it's redundant, it's repetitive there. And then if you go to the summative assessment, there are some that are also repetitive. And one, the cooking demonstration lab, there isn't a cooking class at the middle school any longer. So these are small modifications that we thought we would sort of just bring to you now, which obviously will change next year because they're either repetitive or they're no longer in existence. But the major part of the middle school grading policy comes on the second page. And if you go down to the heading that says, that's titled late work, makeups, missing work, incompletes. If you look at that first sentence, which is crossed out, the current policy states that work will be accepted up to 1 week before the end of the quarter. The middle school administrators, as I said, Ms. Renegaldo and Mrs. Granado, felt as though it was important to hold the students a little bit more accountable for the remainder of this year, while still working with them, while still providing them with supports. And Ms. Renegaldo, I think, maybe can explain a little later the supports that are provided, that both buildings are providing for their students so that they can be successful during this time. But the way that the policy reads is work will be, as I said, will be accepted up until 1 week before the end of the quarter. The modification or the change is that work will be accepted 2 weeks after the assignment is given. So it doesn't give them as long an opportunity to make up the work. What Ms. Renegaldo and Ms. Granado have stated is they don't want students to make up all of the work, on the last week of the quarter or the last week of the semester. They want to hold them accountable so that while they're giving them what they think to be enough time, 2 weeks after the assignment is given, that they would have the ability to make up that assignment. The lower part of that paragraph, where students who do not hand in an assignment will receive a comment code of not submitted. So that really comes into play if an assignment was due at the end of the third quarter, let's say, and those 2 weeks, the 2 week extension on the progress note or the report card, there would simply just be a not submitted in place of a grade. So that's where that would come into play for that particular section. And then if you go below that, again, it's just a minor change, and it's because reading is no longer a half credit. There's no longer a reading class at the middle schools. There have not been reading classes for some years, at least since this policy was approved. So that is it in a nutshell. So again, to summarize, there are some contents here which are really minimal in terms of they're either repetitive or they just don't. They're no longer relevant because of changes in the curriculum. But the main piece here is going from giving students until the end of the quarter to giving them 2 weeks after the assignment was given to submit that work. So I would be happy to answer any questions that the school committee has at this time. And as I said, Ms. Renegaldo is here as well.
I've got just one. I'm a little confused. Let's go to the late work makeups. The major part of the policy change. Students who do not hand in an assignment will receive a comment of NS into the column where grade should be. Okay, so they had 2 weeks, they didn't do it, get an S. Students will have a 2-week grace period after the quarter closes to make up work. What happens if they don't make it up? I don't know. I would have thought there'd be some words that say, you get a 50, what happens at that if you don't make it up? Because you're saying it almost, you dropped one shoe, but we don't know what happens as a consequence if you don't make it up after the quarter.
I'm going to defer to Ms. Renegaldo to answer that question.
So if the students don't make up the work, the policy right now is if they would receive a 50 if they do not turn in work. So the teacher would go and take out the NS as the no submitted, not submitted, and put in a 50.
Let me ask you, is that described elsewhere in the policy, or do we need to describe it right here?
It is described under, if you look under zeros, I basically took, it's one of the last things on the policy.
Oh yeah, zeros, okay.
Under zeros, it talks about receiving a comment code of NS. This was already in the policy from before. The NS is not something that I added that's new. I just put it in a different place also. And then it says so the student will follow the makeup policy listed above. And then if you look right above, I I crossed the sentence out because it's my intention to get rid of the 50 rule, but Dr. McGee and I talked about that not being a possibility for this school year. So that sentence, if by the end of the quarter, student has not submitted his or her work, the student will receive a 50, that is going to stand because we're going to discuss that for next school year about the 50.
So what's crossed out, if by the end of the quarter, that sentence will stay?
That sentence will stay. That was my big hope and dream to have it done by this year too. But
Right. So that cross out will be, that's going to be taken out.
Yes, it won't be crossed out any longer.
So we're voting on this policy with that taken out.
With
That
right, correct. You're correct.
That's why I was confused. Anyone else with comments, questions?
Mr. Chair,
Mrs. Costa?
I just wanted to know the things that you said that we were taking out, like the cooking and stuff like that. Is that something that will eventually come back in, or is that something that we're doing away with? Like the things that you said that we're getting rid of, are those things we're getting rid of for good, or are they eventually have a potential to come back?
So I'm sorry, Jen.
Okay, go ahead. You can answer. Sorry.
So we haven't had cooking for quite some time at the middle school. When we did have cooking, we had one teacher who was our cooking instructor, and she would travel from one middle school to the other. And she retired about 3 or 4 years ago. So when she retired, we didn't fill that position, and that particular encore class was no longer offered. And what we've done last year is we've created what's called an iExplore program for our students in both middle schools, which provides them with exposure to a variety of work-related and employment options for them, when they ultimately graduate from high school. And it's also a nice springboard to the high school and the high school career center. Mr. Webb works very closely with Ms. Renegaldo and Mrs. Granato with the iExplore. And part of the iExplore, it isn't cooking per se, but there is a piece to the iExplore that deals with the culinary industry.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Burke.
Oh, thank you. You knew I had something to say.
You had asked, so I didn't forget you.
That's okay. Though I agree academically and philosophically with some of the changes going on and that are being proposed, I question the timing. And the reason why I question the timing is because it's my belief at the beginning of the year, students and parents agreed to a student handbook which incorporates grading policy. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So obviously what they agreed to for the school year, we are now changing. I could see the changes obviously going into effect in the new school year, but I really question and maybe can explain the logistics and how legally we can change a grading policy during the school year. That's my concern.
So I understand what your comments make sense. I think what happened is, as we've gone through the school year, Ms. Renegaldo and Mrs. Granato have had some struggles with students, and these are things that really aren't new to this school year, although they've been exasperated by this school year, due to just the learning environment that our students are in right now. And they felt as though they had conversations with their staff about making these changes for the last semester of the school year. And so we felt as though we would try this for the remainder of the school year. And, as I stated earlier, there are other changes that they're looking to potentially make for next year, but this would have been the first change going towards the end of this school year, Mr. Burke. I don't know, Mr. Renegaldo, if you wanted to add anything else to that.
We're just trying to hold the kids more accountable. We get a lot of feedback from the high school, especially with the ninth graders, that, leave the middle school, that they're ill prepared, because we do, at the middle school, tend to give them like a lot of chances, more and more and more chances to turn in work. And what I feel we're doing is setting them up for failure, because when they go to the high school, it hits them hard. And that's why the ninth grade, I feel, at the high school doesn't do as well as they should, because we need to hold them more accountable at the middle school. And we're not. And that's why we're trying to change the grading policy to do that.
I guess I'm piggybacking again on Vice Chair Burke. I'm sure we had the same concern, Mr. Renegaldo, at the beginning of the year, or prior to the year, that we were, quote, maybe a little too soft. We've been giving more chances, but we published a handbook where the parents got it, students got it, and said, here's your policy. So I'm not sure if it's wise to make the change now. And I agree with you, Dr. McGee, that at the end of this school year, there may be a bunch of other things that you want to include in that, or make more restrictions, et cetera. And at the end of the year, especially after this stuff here, would be a good time to do it. But I guess you got to be thinking of both sides of this fence. Parents are expecting X, and we're going to give them Y now for the last semester. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just talking, again, it's timing.
Mr. Chairman?
Vice Chair Burke.
I can see the potential of a parent or a student, questioning, you can't do this to me. This is not what I agreed to. Now, that may not happen, but that is the thinking sometimes. And just to protect ourselves, I don't know. I just think we'll open ourselves to some questions if we change midstream. Don't please. I agree with some of the things that are mentioned here. So,
any thoughts about that, Dr. McGee, in terms of timing, especially the comments Vice Chair Burke just gave us?
Well, I think we certainly can hold off and, attempt to implement this next year. What I would like to see this spring is I'd like to see, a subcommittee of the middle schools that includes administrators, teachers and staff, parents, maybe some responsible 8th grade students to look at the grading policy in its entirety, and then come back to the school committee in the mid-spring or late spring about next year. So
that makes sense.
I think that can be done. I think that it's whatever is done, will need to be done strategically, and we'll need to make sure that everyone, and also including also having conversations with the high school. Ms. Renegaldo stated that students go to the high school and are used to being able to submit work and make up work practically through the summer. I'm joking, but they're given an inordinate amount of time, and then when they get to the high school, all of a sudden, there are deadlines, and it's a bit of a culture shock. So I would not be adverse to pushing this to a full subcommittee from the middle schools to look at it over a period of time, and then provide some recommendations for next year.
Would your recommendations also apply to the handbook, so that there be, one leads to the other? So when parents are sitting down with their children, and the teachers and the principals, you've got it in both places. That policy is now going to be implemented into the handbook, and so now the agreements they make will stick. And also, I think the formation of the 9th grade academy should certainly help our 8th graders as they're coming into the 9th grade to familiar ground. But obviously, their requirements will be definitely tightened in terms of their responsibilities. But that's part of going that's part of that transition from 8th to 9th, just like a transition from 5th to 6th. So, yeah, I would think we'd want to hold off on this until you form that committee, because there may be some other issues within the grading policy that you'll come up with that will, put in tighter controls, but, be more appealing to parents and students. Anyone else have any thoughts and comments about this? Dr. McGee, roll call, please.
Chair.
What are we voting on?
We're voting to adopt the policy. So a yes is to adopt it, a no is to just vote it out, and it'll come later.
Okay.
Chairman Bourget,
No.
Vice Chair Burke,
No.
Mrs. Kepiscus,
No.
Mrs. Costa,
No.
Mr. Leclerc.
No.
Then a 5-0 vote, the motion is denied, and the policy is not going to be changed at this point. But I think we're all happy that you're going to form the subcommittee, Dr. McGee, and I think we're going to end up with a better policy.
I think, Mr. Chairman, I'll just add this. I'm not going to be creating the subcommittee. It's going to be Ms. Renegaldo and Mrs. Granado. They'll be formed, but I will certainly be a part of that.
I think that you would be an excellent matador as lifting up the red cape. I think that covers all the items on our agenda, so I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting. Oh, Mrs. Kepiscus.
Fiskus. I just wanted to make sure that as we review the middle school grading policy, keep in mind that we have deadlines to get that policy in a handbook. If the handbook's in printed form still, I don't know if it is or not, we have deadlines for printing. So probably have to work on that sooner rather than later. I just don't want anybody to lose sight of the deadlines.
Mrs. Kepiscus, I'm sure the superintendent, Mr. Renegaldo, will be advised that this has to begin soon. How's that? I agree with you, because it's got to get done real soon. Again, I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting at 8:04 p.m. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Costa. Dr. McGee, please.
Chairman Bourget,
Yes.
Vice Chair Burke,
Yes.
Mrs. Kepiscus,
Yes.
Mrs. Costa,
Yes.
Mr. Leclerc.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Have a nice evening. Stay safe, stay warm, and all those good things. And don't forget your carpet home. It's going to be warm again tomorrow, so enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Have a good night, everyone.
Yeah, you too. Here, everyone.